The dust swirled like angry ghosts across the main street of Bitter Creek, painting the whole town in a dull red haze. The afternoon sun beat down on the crooked buildings as if trying to melt them. Men lounged outside the saloon, drinking cheap whiskey and spitting into the dirt. Horses stamped their hooves. The air smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and old sorrow. Clara Matthews stood on a wooden platform in the center of town, her hands tied in front of her. She kept her eyes on the ground because looking at the faces around her felt like standing naked in the middle of a storm. At 23, she should have had a home and a future. Instead, she was here, being offered to the highest bidder like a worn-out tool. Her brother-in-law Samuel barked at the crowd with the slick voice of a man selling snake oil. "Step right up, gentlemen. A fine woman here. Hard-working. Clean. Just not much luck in the baby-making department. But she'll make a warm bed in a tidy house." Men laughed. Some whispered. Some pointed. Clara lifted her chin. She would not let them see her break. She had learned that weakness in Bitter Creek was like blood in the water. It brought out the sharks. "She, Barren," a miner shouted. "Doc says so," Samuel answered without a pause. "But she works from sunup to sundown without complaint." Another man chuckled. "Might as well buy a mule. At least mules have their uses." Harsh laughter rolled through the crowd. Clara dug her nails into her palms. Her own husband had cast her aside because she could not give him a child. Her own family had brought her here. And now this town, a town she had lived in her whole life, watched her humiliation like it was a show for entertainment. "I'll give you $5, a heavy man in a stained vest said. "Need someone to wash laundry." Samuel sneered. "She's worth 20. Worth. They used that word so easily, as if a woman's value could be measured in dollars, children, or chores. Then the mood shifted. The crowd fell silent. Heads turned. The men parted to make way for a lone rider approaching on horseback, Jed Carson. Clara had seen him only from a distance before, a rancher who kept to himself, a widower who had buried his wife 2 winters back, a man with ash-gray eyes who looked like he had survived every kind of storm a person could face. He dismounted and walked toward the platform, broad shoulders, scarred hands, calm steps, a quiet strength that made the crowd uneasy. He stopped in front of Clara, his face unreadable. "How much?" he asked. Samuel lit up with greedy delight. "25 and she's yours." Jed didn't argue. He pulled out a leather pouch and tossed it to Samuel. Samuel's eyes widened at the weight. "That's 50, Jed said. "The extra is for you to forget she ever existed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. $50 was a fortune. Samuel didn't hesitate. "She's yours, Mr. Carson. All yours." Jed stepped onto the platform and cut Clara's ropes with a small knife. His hands were rough but gentle, surprising her. "You won't be judged anymore," he said quietly. "Not in my house." He turned and walked toward his wagon, knowing she would follow. Clara looked at the faces she had grown up around. Not one held kindness. Not one held regret. They looked at her the way they looked at stray dogs, something they could kick aside without consequence. So she followed Jed Carson. He helped her onto the wagon. His touch was firm, steady, but not demanding. Not angry, not cruel, just sure. As they left Bitter Creek behind, the town shrank until it became a small smear of wood and dust on the horizon. The road stretched ahead in long red lines, winding through sagebrush and dry earth. Hawks circled above. The wheels creaked. Hooves thudded softly. Clara studied Jed's strong back, his straight posture, his quiet focus. What kind of man paid $50 for a barren woman? Hours passed in silence until the sun dipped low, turning the sky purple and gold. Jed finally spoke without turning around. "Got 4 young ones at home," he said. "Lost their ma to fever. They need tending. House needs keeping. That's all I'm asking." Clara found her voice. "Why me? You could have hired someone for a lot less than what you paid." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady and thoughtful. "Because you know what it feels like to be treated as worthless by people who should know better. My children don't need pity. They need someone who understands that worth isn't measured by easy things. Warmth moved through Clara's chest. Not heat, not love, not yet, but a spark of something she thought she would never feel again. Dignity. As the sky darkened, a single light appeared in the distance. "That's home," Jed said, "such as it is." The Carson ranch sat against a rocky hill, small, worn, but standing strong. 4 small faces peered through the window. The moment Jed helped her down from the wagon, the children scattered like startled rabbits. Whatever tomorrow held, it had to be better than the platform she left behind. Clara made a silent promise to herself. She would prove her worth. Not to Jed, not to Bitter Creek, but to herself. Tonight, the wind carried the scent of rain, a sign of change, a sign of something new. Clara woke before sunrise on her first morning at the Carson ranch, the pale dawn light spilling through the small kitchen window. She stood alone in the quiet room, taking in the chip table, the rusty stove, and the pots stacked crookedly in the corner. This place needed a woman's touch, but it also felt like a chance to start over. The floor creaked behind her. She turned to see the eldest child standing in the doorway, hair sticking up like he'd slept on a hay bale. "I'm Thomas," he said, cautious. "Pa said you'd be cooking breakfast." "That's right," Clara replied. "Could you show me where the supplies are?" He nodded and helped her search the cabinets. They found flour with mouse holes in the sack and a piece of salt pork that had seen better days. Beans rattled in a jar, sounding more like pebbles than food. Clara forced a smile. "We'll make do." Thomas helped gather firewood while Clara lit the stove. She had cooked simple meals before, but this kitchen worked against her from the first minute. The beans, soaked overnight, had taken on a strange smell. She tossed in herbs she thought were pepper, only to discover later they were stored next to gunpowder. When she stirred the pot, tiny sparks popped on the surface. Alarmed, she buried the whole thing behind the cabin. The bread was worse, burned black on the outside and raw inside. She set it on the table anyway, hoping maybe it tasted better than it looked. By the time Jed came home from the pasture around noon, the kitchen was filled with smoke. Clara stood there, coated in flour and shame, while the children stared, half fascinated, half horrified. Jed surveyed the wreckage with calm eyes. He picked up the burnt bread, broke off a piece, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed with effort. "Better than my first try," he said simply. "I nearly killed the chickens." Little Elizabeth giggled. "Pa made biscuits so hard we used them for target practice." Clara's embarrassment eased into a small laugh. She wasn't perfect, but neither was this place. Maybe that was exactly why she belonged here. In the days that followed, Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life. Each child came with their own challenges. Thomas tried too hard to be a man. He did chores that bent his skinny frame and hoarded food under his bed. Mary, 10 years old, carried responsibility like it was stitched into her clothes. She kept everything orderly, hid her fear behind calm eyes, and separated each item on her plate so nothing touched. Sam, 7, collected rocks and bugs and refused to eat vegetables unless they were hidden in something else. Little Elizabeth followed Clara everywhere, chattering like a bird, always wanting stories and hugs. Clara adjusted slowly. The stove was temperamental, but she coaxed it into obedience. Thomas talked more when helping her with chores. Mary taught her which wild herbs grew behind the barn. Sam showed her every rock he found, each with a detailed story. And Elizabeth insisted Clara braid her hair, even though her small fingers tangled in Clara's dress every time she turned. One evening, as Clara tried to patch Sam's torn pants, Thomas spoke quietly from the corner. "Mrs. Whitman said we're wild as coyotes, said no one can tame us." Quote. Clara put her sewing aside. "Coyotes are clever, strong, survivors. Nothing wrong with being wild." Mary watched her closely. "Our mama was strong until she wasn't." The grief in her voice was sharp. Clara took a breath. "I can't promise I'll never get sick. No one can. But I can promise I'll do my best. Every day." Elizabeth climbed into her lap. Will you brush my hair? Pa pulls too hard. Clara's voice softened. Of course, sweetheart. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Jed sat on the porch, carving a small wooden horse. Clara stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. They're starting to trust you, Jed said without looking up. You raised good children, she replied. They just needed time. He paused, then spoke quietly. Their mother, Sarah, she had a way of making people feel safe. When she died, we all forgot how to be a family. Clara's heart stirred at the raw honesty in his voice. Surviving isn't nothing, she said. Sometimes it's everything. He finally looked at her. Those ash-gray eyes held something deep, something steady. You'd know about that, he murmured. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like understanding. Then the storm came. The sky turned the color of bruised steel. Wind howled. Rain hammered the roof so hard the whole cabin shook. Lightning cracked the air and Elizabeth screamed, running to Clara with wide, frightened eyes. Clara gathered the children near the stove. It's just a storm, we'll weather it. But when Elizabeth sagged against her, burning with fever, Clara's stomach dropped. She gets them sometimes, Mary whispered. Mama used to fix her. Clara's hands didn't shake as she ordered everyone into motion. She sent Thomas for cloth, Mary for water, Sam for herbs. She carried Elizabeth to bed and worked through the fever like she'd been born for this. Cold cloths, willow bark tea, whispered stories. Hours passed. Jed burst through the door, soaked and pale, terrified at the sight of his burning daughter. Not again, he whispered. She needs you, Clara told him. Talk to her. Tell her she's safe. Jed knelt beside his girl, voice trembling. Little rabbit, remember the story of the clever rabbit who outsmarted the fox? Elizabeth whimpered. Papa? I'm right here. Together they fought the fever through the night. Clara fed the child herbs, replaced the cloths, hummed lullabies. Jed told stories until his voice broke. When he faltered, Clara steadied him with a hand on his arm. Just before sunrise, the fever broke. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open, her smile weak but real. Papa, Mama? Jed froze. Clara's breath caught. Elizabeth touched Clara's cheek. Mama fixed me. Jed closed his eyes in relief. Clara brushed tears away. I'm right here, sweetheart. The children rushed in then, hugging their sister, hugging Clara, hugging each other. That evening at supper, after the relief had settled warm and deep in the house, Elizabeth spoke again. Papa, she said, looking at Clara, is Miss Clara my mama now? Silence fell. Jed looked at Clara. Clara looked at the children. 4 hopeful faces. 4 wounded hearts wanting to belong. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. If you want me, she whispered, I'd be honored to be your mama. The children surged forward, wrapping their arms around her. Thomas, too old to cry, cried anyway. Mary laid her head on Clara's shoulder. Sam climbed into her lap. Elizabeth held her hand tightly. Jed watched with a look that made Clara's heart tremble, soft, proud, and full of something she did not dare name yet. He stepped forward. Welcome to the family, Clara, he said quietly. And for the first time in years, Clara felt like she had come home. The ranch woke before sunrise, the way it always did. But something felt different now. The children moved with lighter steps. Clara hummed while preparing breakfast. Even Jed, who carried the weight of his past like a stone in his chest, seemed less burdened. But peace in the West never lasted long. It started when Clara went out at dusk to check on the chickens. The sky was turning orange, and the wind was warm and heavy. She was collecting the eggs when a sour smell of whiskey drifted toward her. Bill Hawkins. He stumbled through the gate with red cheeks, watery eyes, and a swagger that made Clara's stomach twist. Well now, he slurred, if it ain't the Barren lady who's playing mama. Clara stepped back, blocking his way to the coop. You need to leave, Mr. Hawkins. Jed will. Jed's miles away checking cattle, Hawkins sneered, and a man who buys a woman has certain rights, ain't that so? Especially when that woman's got nothing to offer but warmth. Fear prickled across Clara's skin, but she stood tall. "You need to leave," she repeated. He moved toward her, fast. His hand reached out, thick fingers curling like claws. Clara grabbed the egg basket and swung with all her strength. Eggs exploded across his face, shells slicing his skin. Hawkins roared, stumbling, wiping yolk out of his eyes. "You!" he shouted, lunging again. Before he reached her, a gunshot tore through the air. Jed. He stood 20 feet away, rifle raised, his face as cold as a winter storm. "Step away from her, Hawkins." Hawkins froze. "Jed, now wait. This ain't—" "Another word," Jed warned, "and I end this conversation for good." Hawkins swallowed, hatred twisting his features. "She's not worth—" The rifle cracked again, the bullet hitting the dirt right at Hawkins' boot. "That's your last warning. Get off my land." Hawkins backed away, climbing onto his horse, spitting dirt and curses. "This ain't over." Jed lowered the gun only when Hawkins disappeared into the darkening horizon. Then he turned to Clara. His eyes swept her quickly, checking for injuries. "You hurt?" "Just shaken," Clara whispered. He closed the distance in 2 strides, cupping her cheek with a trembling hand. "I should have been here," he said, guilt heavy in his voice. "I should have protected you better." "You did protect me," Clara said softly. "You always do." Their eyes held, the air between them pulling tight, the unspoken truth settling heavy and warm in Clara's chest. "Come inside," she said. "Let me wrap your hand." He nodded, but his gaze stayed on her lips longer than it should have. Inside the house, the children were already at the table. Clara cleaned the cut on Jed's hand while the kids ate quietly, sensing something had happened. When she finished, Jed caught her wrist gently. "What Hawkins said," he murmured, "about what I expect from you. Don't you ever believe a word of it." Clara's heartbeat kicked up. "Then tell me, what do we have, Jed?" He turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. "A partnership," he said. "A home, a family. And maybe something more, if you're willing." Clara's breath caught. She had waited her whole life for someone to look at her the way Jed was looking at her now, as if she was more than the empty space people blamed her for. "I'm willing," she whispered. A smile tugged at his lips, soft and warm. He stood, pulling her up with him, and brushed his thumb across her cheek, right over the bruise Hawkins had left. "You sure about this?" Jed asked. "I ain't an easy man. I've got 4 kids, a ranch that barely gets by, and a heart," Clara finished. "A good one. That's worth more than anything." Quote. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, gentle at first, careful. Then Clara's hands found the front of his shirt, and he pulled her closer with a quiet groan that came from somewhere deep. This kiss was everything she had never known she needed. Fierce, real, alive. The world shifted beneath her feet. "Mama!" They broke apart instantly. Little Elizabeth stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Papa kissin'. You're hurt better?" she asked seriously. Jed chuckled, lifting her. "Something like that, little rabbit." Satisfied, Elizabeth skipped back to her siblings. Clara touched her lips, feeling the heat of the kiss long after it ended. Jed looked at her, eyes warm. "Clara," he murmured, "you've ruined me." And she knew he meant it in all the right ways. That night, the house felt different, full, safe, alive. The next afternoon, trouble returned. Thomas came running from the barn carrying Sam in his arms, blood pouring down the boy's leg. "The axe slipped," Thomas cried. "We need help." Clara took charge at once. "Lay him on the table," she ordered. "Mary, boil water. Thomas, bring all the cloth you can find. Sam, sweetheart, stay awake for me." The gash was deep, too deep. Jed burst in, went pale, and moved beside her. "I'll get the doctor." "No time," Clara said firmly. "We do this now." Jed held Sam steady while Clara stitched the wound with trembling but determined hands. Sam screamed until he passed out, but Clara did not falter. She worked through the blood, the fear, the memory of every time she had been called worthless. Worthless women did not save lives. When the final stitch was in place, she wiped her eyes and checked his pulse. "We wait," she whispered, "and we pray." 3 days later, the fever came. Clara stayed by Sam's side without sleeping, feeding him broth, cooling his forehead, whispering strength into every breath. On the 4th day, Sam woke up clear-eyed. "Mama," he whispered, "you fixed me." "You scared me half to death," Clara whispered back, stroking his hair. "You fixed me," Sam repeated with sleepy pride. "Just like you fix everything." Quote. Jed stood behind her, full of relief. He pulled Clara into a tight embrace once Sam fell asleep again. "You saved him," Jed said. "You saved our boy." "Our boy," Clara corrected softly. Something changed in Jed's face at those words. Something opened, deep and raw. "Then let's make it official," he said. He took her hand. "I want you as my wife. In every way. Clara, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The children crowded around, cheering, laughing, hugging her. That night, the family sat by the fire, planning the wedding. Elizabeth wanted flowers. Mary wanted to sew the dress. Thomas offered to build the arch. Sam asked if he could carry the rings, even with his healing leg. Clara watched them all with a full, overflowing heart. A barren woman had become the root of a whole family. Love had grown in the very place she once felt empty. Later, Jed held her close on the porch, the stars bright above them. "Clara," he murmured, brushing a kiss across her forehead, "you've given us a life I never thought we'd have again." Clara rested her head against his chest. "And you gave me a home," she whispered. "A family, a future." A coyote sang in the distance, not lonely but triumphant. The wind carried the scent of sage. Their children slept under the same roof. Their wedding would come soon. And Clara, once cast aside as worthless, finally believed the truth. She was the heart of this home. She was the mother of this family. She was the treasure Jed had found at the lowest moment of her life. And together, they had turned barren ground into something that would bloom for generations.